In a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other by name, life moved at a predictable pace. The streets were lined with modest houses, their front yards neatly trimmed and decorated with flower pots. Children played on sidewalks, laughing, as they chased each other, while older residents sat on porches sipping coffee or tea. It was the kind of place where people greeted one another warmly and disputes rarely went beyond raised voices. But beneath this peaceful surface lay simmering tensions, small prejudices that most chose to ignore until one evening when everything changed forever. Mark lived in a house near the corner of Maple Street. He was a middle-aged man with a reputation for being short-tempered and loud. People often avoided crossing paths with him because he had a habit of complaining about anything and everything: noisy kids, slow internet, or cars parked too close to his driveway. His wife had left him years ago, citing his inability to control his temper. And since then, Mark's bitterness seemed to grow with each passing day. Work didn't help either. His boss constantly criticized him and his co-workers kept their distance. On this particular evening, Mark's mood was worse than usual. Traffic had been terrible on his way home, and his boss had berated him during a meeting earlier that day. By the time he pulled into his driveway, he felt like a ticking bomb ready to explode. As Mark got out of his car, he noticed someone walking down the street, a tall black man accompanied by a large dog. The man looked around casually, taking in the sights of the neighborhood. His name was James, though Mark didn't know that yet. James had recently moved into the area and was trying to familiarize himself with his surroundings. He loved long walks, especially in the evenings when the air was cool and calm. His loyal German shepherd, Max, trotted happily beside him, tail wagging as he sniffed every tree and fence post they passed. James hadn't met many of his new neighbors yet, but he hoped these walks would give him a chance to introduce himself. Mark frowned as he watched James approach. Something about the sight irritated him, an irrational anger bubbling up inside him. Maybe it was the fact that James looked different from most people in the neighborhood, or maybe it was just the culmination of all the frustrations Mark had bottled up throughout the day. Whatever the reason, he couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. As James drew closer, Mark stepped forward and called out, "Hey! What are you doing here? This isn't your neighborhood." James stopped in his tracks, surprised by the sudden hostility. He turned toward Mark and replied calmly, "I'm just taking a walk. I live nearby." His voice was polite, almost apologetic, as if he sensed the tension in the air and wanted to diffuse it. But Mark wasn't satisfied. Instead of backing down, he grew angrier. "You shouldn't be here," he snapped, his tone sharp and accusatory. "Go back to wherever you came from." The few neighbors who were outside began to take notice. Some paused mid-conversation, while others peeked out from behind curtains. Everyone knew Mark's temper, so no one dared to intervene, at least not yet. They exchanged glances, silently wondering if things would escalate further. Meanwhile, James tried to remain composed. He wasn't used to being treated this way, but he didn't want to cause trouble. "I mean no harm," he said firmly, meeting Mark's gaze. "I'm just enjoying the evening like anyone else." But Mark wasn't listening. His mind was clouded with prejudice and rage, emotions that had festered over years of unresolved issues. To him, James represented everything he disliked but couldn't quite put into words. Ignoring the growing audience, Mark took another step closer, pointing a finger accusingly at James. "You don't belong here," he spat. "People like you should stay away from decent neighborhoods." James clenched his fists briefly, resisting the urge to retaliate. He reminded himself that arguing wouldn't solve anything. Still, he couldn't let such blatant disrespect slide entirely. "I pay my taxes and follow the rules, same as anyone else," he said evenly. "If you have a problem with me, say it directly instead of hiding behind insults." This response only fueled Mark's anger. He hated being challenged, especially in public. His face turned red, veins bulging in his neck as he shouted, "Don't talk back to me." Without thinking, he balled his hand into a fist and swung it at James. Time seemed to slow down as the punch connected, landing squarely on James's jaw. The sound echoed through the silent street, followed by gasps from the onlookers. For a moment there was complete stillness, broken only by the low growl of Max, who stood protectively beside his owner. James staggered back, clutching his face. Pain shot through his jaw. But what hurt more was the shock of what had just happened. He hadn't expected violence, not in this quiet little town where nothing ever seemed to go wrong. As he steadied himself, he locked eyes with Mark, who wore an expression of triumph mixed with defiance. But before Mark could gloat or throw another punch, something extraordinary happened. Max, who had been watching the scene unfold with increasing agitation, sprang into action. With a fierce bark, the German shepherd lunged forward, sinking his teeth into Mark's arm. Mark screamed in pain, thrashing wildly as he tried to free himself from the dog's grip. Max held on tight, his powerful jaws unyielding. It was clear that the dog wasn't attacking out of malice but out of loyalty to his master. Only when James commanded, "Max, stop," did the dog release his hold and step back, panting heavily but standing alert, ready to defend again if needed. The crowd erupted into murmurs. Some rushed to James's side, offering help and support, while others stared at Mark, whose arm now bore deep bite marks. Blood trickled down his sleeve, staining the fabric. Fear replaced his earlier bravado as he realized the gravity of the situation. Neighbors who had once tolerated his tantrums now looked at him with disgust. Someone called the police, and within minutes sirens could be heard approaching the scene. As officers arrived and began questioning witnesses, the truth became undeniable. Mark had initiated the confrontation, using racially charged language, and resorting to physical violence. James, though injured, remained calm and cooperative, explaining how he had done nothing to provoke the attack. Max, meanwhile, earned praise for his role in protecting his owner, with officers noting that the dog had acted instinctively rather than aggressively. That night, as James tended to his bruised jaw and comforted Max, he reflected on what had happened. He knew that moving to a new neighborhood always came with challenges, but he hadn't anticipated facing outright hostility. Still, he refused to let fear dictate his actions. He vowed to continue taking walks with Max, determined to prove that kindness and resilience could overcome ignorance and hate. For Mark, however, the consequences were severe. Arrested and charged with assault and hate speech, he faced legal repercussions that would haunt him for months to come. The incident forced the entire neighborhood to confront uncomfortable truths about prejudice and accountability. Conversations about race and respect became common topics at dinner tables and community meetings. Slowly but surely, the town began to change for the better. And so, under the glow of streetlights, James and Max continued their nightly strolls, symbols of courage and unity in a world that desperately needed both. The argument between Mark and James escalated quickly, drawing more attention than either man had anticipated. What started as a tense exchange of words soon turned into a spectacle that gripped the entire neighborhood. Neighbors who had been chatting casually on their porches or tending to their gardens stopped what they were doing to watch the unfolding drama. Some whispered nervously among themselves, while others pulled out their phones to record the confrontation, unsure whether it would spiral out of control. Mark's voice grew louder with each passing second. His face was flushed red, veins bulging in his neck as he hurled insult after insult at James. The racial undertones of his words became impossible to ignore. "You don't belong here," he shouted, jabbing a finger in James's direction. "This is a decent neighborhood, not some place for troublemakers like you." Each accusation landed like a punch, heavy with malice and disdain. James, however, refused to back down. Though his jaw tightened slightly, betraying his frustration, he maintained his composure. He didn't want to stoop to Mark's level, but he also couldn't let such blatant disrespect go unanswered. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said firmly, his tone measured despite the rising tension. "I'm just walking my dog, same as anyone else would do." "Why are you attacking me?" Mark scoffed, dismissing James's response as if it meant nothing. To him, logic and reason held no weight against the anger boiling inside him. Instead of calming down, he stepped closer, invading James's personal space. "Don't act innocent," Mark sneered. "People like you always cause problems wherever you go." At this point, even those who disliked getting involved felt compelled to step forward. Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman known for her kind heart, cautiously approached the scene. She held up her hands in a gesture of peace. "Mark, please," she pleaded softly. "There's no need for this, let's all just calm down." But Mark brushed her off rudely, snapping, "Stay out of this, old lady. This doesn't concern you." Mrs. Thompson flinched at his harsh tone, retreating a few steps. Others hesitated, unsure whether to intervene further. A young boy named Tommy, who had been playing catch with his friends nearby, watched wide-eyed as the situation deteriorated. His mother hurried over and pulled him away, whispering, "Come on, sweetie, let's go inside." Fear rippled through the crowd, mingling with disbelief. No one could understand why Mark was behaving so irrationally, or why James remained so calm in the face of such hostility. For James, staying composed wasn't easy. Inside, he felt a mix of emotions: anger, hurt, and confusion. He hadn't expected to encounter racism in this quiet suburban neighborhood, where people generally seemed friendly and welcoming. Yet, he reminded himself that reacting impulsively wouldn't help. Losing his temper would only validate Mark's baseless accusations and give him exactly what he wanted: a reason to escalate the conflict further. Max, James's loyal German shepherd, sensed his owner's distress. The dog's ears perked up and his tail stiffened as he stood protectively beside James. Max's eyes locked onto Mark, studying his every move. Though he appeared calm on the surface, the dog was ready to spring into action if needed. James placed a reassuring hand on Max's head, silently urging him to stay put. For now, James hoped the situation could be resolved without violence. But Mark wasn't interested in resolution. His rage blinded him to reason, fueling his desire to dominate the conversation or perhaps humiliate James entirely. When his verbal attacks failed to provoke the reaction he sought, he resorted to something far more dangerous: physical aggression. Without warning, Mark balled his hand into a fist and swung it toward James. Time seemed to slow as the punch connected, landing squarely on James's jaw. The impact sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd. Gasps echoed across the street, followed by cries of alarm. James stumbled backward, clutching his face. Pain shot through his jaw, sharp and stinging, but it was the shock that hit hardest. He hadn't expected things to turn violent. Not here, not in this peaceful little town. As he steadied himself, he locked eyes with Mark, who wore an expression of smug satisfaction mixed with defiance. Before Mark could gloat or throw another punch, something extraordinary happened. Max, who had been watching the scene unfold with increasing agitation, sprang into action. With a fierce bark, the German shepherd lunged forward, sinking his teeth into Mark's arm. Mark screamed in agony, thrashing wildly as he tried to free himself from the dog's grip. Max held on tight, his powerful jaws unyielding. It was clear that the dog wasn't attacking out of malice but out of loyalty to his master. Only when James commanded, "Max, stop!" did the dog release his hold and step back, panting heavily but standing alert, ready to defend again if needed. The crowd erupted into murmurs. Some rushed to James's side, offering help and support, while others stared at Mark, whose arm now bore deep bite marks. Blood trickled down his sleeve, staining the fabric. Fear replaced his earlier bravado as he realized the gravity of the situation. Neighbors who had once tolerated his tantrums now looked at him with disgust. Someone called the police, and within minutes sirens could be heard approaching the scene. As officers arrived and began questioning witnesses, the truth became undeniable. Mark had initiated the confrontation, using racially charged language, and resorting to physical violence. James, though injured, remained calm and cooperative, explaining how he had done nothing to provoke the attack. Max, meanwhile, earned praise for his role in protecting his owner, with officers noting that the dog had acted instinctively rather than aggressively. That night, as James tended to his bruised jaw and comforted Max, he reflected on what had happened. He knew that moving to a new neighborhood always came with challenges, but he hadn't anticipated facing outright hostility. Still, he refused to let fear dictate his actions. He vowed to continue taking walks with Max, determined to prove that kindness and resilience could overcome ignorance and hate. For Mark, however, the consequences were severe. Arrested and charged with assault and hate speech, he faced legal repercussions that would haunt him for months to come. The incident forced the entire neighborhood to confront uncomfortable truths about prejudice and accountability. Conversations about race and respect became common topics at dinner tables and community meetings. Slowly but surely, the town began to change, for the better. And so, under the glow of streetlights, James and Max continued their nightly strolls, symbols of courage and unity in a world that desperately needed both. Their story served as a reminder that even in the darkest moments there is always hope for redemption, and that sometimes the most unexpected heroes can teach us the greatest lessons. As the chaos unfolded, the neighborhood transformed into a scene straight out of a movie. The once quiet street buzzed with activity as people gathered around, their faces reflecting a mix of shock, fear, and disbelief. Some stood frozen in place, unable to process what had just happened, while others rushed forward to help James or pull Mark away from further harm. Max, the German shepherd, remained at the center of it all, his protective stance unwavering as he kept a close eye on Mark, who now cradled his bleeding arm. Mark's scream echoed through the air, piercing the silence that had briefly taken hold after the punch. His face twisted in pain and panic as he realized the severity of the situation. Blood seeped through his torn sleeve, staining his skin and dripping onto the pavement. For a moment he forgot about his anger, consumed instead by the primal instinct to escape the dog's powerful jaws. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet in his desperation to get away. But Max didn't chase him. Instead, the dog stayed rooted beside James, waiting for further instructions. James, though hurt, quickly regained his composure. He knelt down beside Max, placing a firm hand on the dog's head. "Good boy," he murmured softly, his voice filled with gratitude. Despite the throbbing pain in his jaw, James felt a surge of relief knowing that Max had acted purely out of loyalty and love. Without hesitation, the dog had stepped in to protect him when he needed it most. James gave Max another reassuring pat before turning his attention back to the crowd. By now, several neighbors had surrounded them, offering words of support and checking if James was okay. Mrs. Thompson, still shaken from her earlier attempt to intervene, handed him a clean cloth to press against his swollen jaw. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked gently, her voice trembling with concern. James nodded, forcing a small smile despite the discomfort. "I'll be fine," he assured her. "Thank you." Meanwhile, Mark sat slumped on the curb, clutching his injured arm. His bravado had vanished, replaced by a look of sheer terror. Gone was the man who moments ago had hurled insults and thrown punches. In his place was someone broken and vulnerable. A few people approached cautiously, not out of sympathy, but to ensure he wouldn't try anything else reckless. One of them, a teenager named Sarah, snapped photos of the scene on her phone, capturing the aftermath of the altercation. She later explained that she wanted evidence in case things escalated further. The sound of approaching sirens broke through the tension. Within minutes, police cars arrived, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows across the street. Officers stepped out, assessing the situation with practiced efficiency. They separated the two men, asking each side to recount what had happened. Witnesses eagerly shared their accounts, describing how Mark had initiated the argument, used racial slurs, and ultimately resorted to violence. Others praised Max for stepping in when James needed protection, emphasizing that the dog had only acted defensively. James spoke calmly during questioning, explaining how he had simply been taking a walk when Mark confronted him without provocation. He admitted that he hadn't expected the encounter to turn violent, but expressed gratitude for the officer's swift response. When asked about Max, James defended his dog passionately. "He's trained to protect me," James said. "What happened tonight was pure instinct. He stopped biting immediately when I told him to." Mark, on the other hand, struggled to explain himself. His story came out in fragments, disjointed and defensive. He claimed that James had intimidated him, a claim met with skeptical looks from both officers and bystanders, and insisted that the dog had attacked him unprovoked. But the evidence spoke louder than his words. The bruises forming on James's face, the bite marks on Mark's arm, and the testimony of numerous witnesses painted a clear picture of what had transpired. While the investigation continued, paramedics arrived to tend to the injuries. James declined a trip to the hospital, saying his jaw would heal with rest and ice. Mark, however, required more attention. The deep puncture wounds on his arm needed cleaning and bandaging to prevent infection. As medics worked on him, Mark winced in pain, occasionally glancing toward James with a mixture of guilt and resentment. It was hard to tell which emotion outweighed the other. News of the incident spread like wildfire throughout the neighborhood. By the time the officers finished gathering statements and led Mark into a patrol car, groups of residents had already begun discussing what they had witnessed. Conversations ranged from outrage over Mark's behavior to admiration for James's composure under pressure. Many expressed concern about the underlying prejudice that had fueled the confrontation, wondering how such attitudes could exist in their seemingly peaceful community. That evening, as the commotion settled and the streets grew quiet again, James returned home with Max by his side. The adrenaline rush had worn off, leaving him exhausted but reflective. Sitting on the edge of his bed, he gently massaged his sore jaw, replaying the events in his mind. He thought about how quickly the situation had spiraled out of control, and how easily it could have ended much worse. Yet amidst the turmoil, he found solace in one undeniable truth. Max had saved him. Max, sensing his owner's mood, rested his head on James's lap, looking up with soulful eyes. James chuckled softly, scratching behind the dog's ears. "You're my hero," he said, his voice tinged with affection. Max wagged his tail in response, content to be near the person he loved most. In that moment, James felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for Max, but for the neighbors who had stepped forward to support him. Their kindness reminded him that humanity wasn't defined by individuals like Mark, but by those who chose compassion over cruelty. Outside, the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Streetlights flickered on, casting soft glows over empty sidewalks. Children resumed playing in their yards, unaware of the drama that had unfolded earlier. Parents exchanged cautious smiles, acknowledging the weight of the day's events. Conversations about race, respect, and accountability lingered in the air, sparking a collective desire for change. For Mark, the night held no comfort. Sitting alone in a holding cell, he replayed the incident in his mind, haunted by the consequences of his actions. The physical pain in his arm paled in comparison to the shame and regret gnawing at him. He thought about the neighbors who had once tolerated his temperamental nature but now looked at him with disdain. Most of all, he thought about James, the man whose calm demeanor had exposed the ugliness within him. As dawn approached, James stepped outside for some fresh air. Leaning against his porch railing, he gazed at the horizon where streaks of orange and pink painted the sky. Despite everything that had happened, he felt a strange sense of hope. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, especially as news of the incident spread beyond the neighborhood. But he also knew that challenges often brought opportunities for growth, for himself, for his community, and perhaps even for Mark. Beside him, Max sat quietly, his presence a constant reminder of loyalty and strength. Together, they watched the sun rise, symbolizing a new beginning. Whatever the future held, James vowed to face it with courage and resilience. After all, life's greatest lessons often come from its hardest moments, and sometimes the smallest acts of bravery can inspire the biggest changes. The days following the incident brought a whirlwind of emotions and activity to the neighborhood. News of the altercation spread beyond Maple Street, reaching nearby areas and even making headlines in the local newspaper. The story captured public attention, not just because of the dramatic details, but also due to its underlying themes of prejudice, accountability, and redemption. For James, life became a mix of challenges and unexpected support, while for Mark, it was a descent into shame and self-reflection. James woke up each morning with a sense of purpose. though his jaw still ached from the punch he had endured. He knew people were talking about him, some out of admiration for how he handled the situation, others out of curiosity or concern. Strangers began approaching him during his walks, offering words of encouragement or simply thanking him for standing strong against hatred. One elderly woman named Mrs. Harper stopped him on the sidewalk one afternoon, tears welling in her eyes. "You remind me of my son," she said softly. "He faced similar struggles years ago. I'm so sorry this happened to you." At first, James felt uncomfortable being at the center of so much attention. He wasn't used to being seen as a symbol of resilience or courage. But over time, he realized that his experience could serve a greater purpose. By speaking openly about what had happened, he hoped to spark meaningful conversations about race and respect within the community. When invited to speak at a neighborhood meeting, he accepted without hesitation, determined to turn a painful moment into an opportunity for growth. Meanwhile, Mark's world seemed to crumble around him. Arrested and charged with assault and hate speech, he faced legal consequences that weighed heavily on his shoulders. His mugshot appeared in the local paper alongside articles detailing the incident. Friends and acquaintances who once tolerated his temper now avoided him altogether, embarrassed by association. Even his co-workers kept their distance, whispering behind his back whenever he entered the office. Mark felt isolated, trapped in a cycle of guilt and regret. Court proceedings dragged on, adding to Mark's anxiety. During hearings, witnesses recounted the events of that fateful evening, leaving no room for doubt about his role in the altercation. Officers testified about the racial slurs he had used, while neighbors described his aggressive behavior leading up to the punch. James himself took the stand, delivering a calm yet powerful account of what had transpired. He didn't seek revenge or punishment. Instead, he emphasized the importance of understanding and education. "I believe everyone deserves a second chance," he told the judge. "But we must hold ourselves accountable for our actions if we hope to grow." Mark listened silently, his head bowed in shame. Hearing James speak with such grace and forgiveness made him feel even smaller. He had expected anger or bitterness, but James's words carried no trace of malice. Instead, they reflected a desire to heal, not just himself but the fractured community around them. For the first time, Mark began to see the depth of his own flaws. He realized that his actions hadn't just hurt James. They had damaged relationships, tarnished reputations, and exposed deep-seated prejudices lurking beneath the surface of their seemingly idyllic town. As part of his sentence, Mark was ordered to attend counseling sessions focused on anger management and racial sensitivity training. At first, he resisted, viewing these requirements as unnecessary burdens. But as weeks turned into months, something shifted inside him. Through therapy, he confronted painful truths about his upbringing and the biases he had unconsciously adopted over the years. He learned to recognize triggers that fueled his temper and practiced healthier ways to cope with frustration. Slowly but surely, he started taking steps toward change. Back in the neighborhood, efforts to foster inclusivity gained momentum. Inspired by James's bravery, residents organized workshops and discussions aimed at addressing systemic issues of prejudice and discrimination. Schools introduced programs teaching children about empathy and acceptance, encouraging them to celebrate diversity rather than fear it. Local leaders collaborated with activists to create initiatives promoting unity and equality. These efforts weren't perfect. There were setbacks and disagreements along the way, but they represented progress nonetheless. James played an active role in these endeavors, using his voice to advocate for positive change. He partnered with animal shelters to highlight the bond between humans and pets, sharing stories of how Max's loyalty had saved him during the darkest moments. Together, man and dog became symbols of resilience and hope, reminding everyone that love and protection often come from unexpected places. Max, too, became a beloved figure in the community. Neighbors treated him like a celebrity, showering him with treats and affection whenever they saw him. Children begged their parents to let them pet him, marveling at his size and strength. Yet despite all the attention, Max remained humble and gentle, always staying close to James. Their partnership exemplified trust and devotion, a testament to the power of unconditional love. For James, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible after such a life-changing event. He continued his evening walks with Max, enjoying the cool breeze and quiet streets. Conversations with neighbors grew warmer and more frequent, filled with laughter and shared experiences. Though scars lingered, both physical and emotional, he chose to focus on the positives. Each sunrise brought new opportunities to connect, learn, and grow. Mark, too, found glimpses of redemption in unlikely places. After completing his mandatory community service, he volunteered at a local shelter, serving meals to those in need. It was humbling work, forcing him to confront his privilege and rethink his priorities. Over time, he rebuilt some of the bridges he had burned, earning tentative forgiveness from those he had wronged. While trust wouldn't come easily, he understood that rebuilding relationships required patience and consistency. One evening, nearly a year after the incident, James and Max strolled past Mark's house. For the first time since the altercation, Mark stepped outside to greet them. His posture was hesitant, his voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to say I'm sorry," he admitted, looking directly at James. "What I did was wrong, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends." James studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. "Apologies are important," he replied, "but actions matter more. Keep doing the work, and maybe someday things will be different for all of us." With that, he gave Max a gentle nudge, and the pair continued down the street, leaving Mark standing alone in the fading light. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear: change was possible. In a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, acts of courage and compassion could bridge even the widest gaps. And under the glow of streetlights, James and Max walked onward, embodying the promise of a brighter future, one step at a time. As the weeks turned into months, the neighborhood began to heal, though scars, both visible and invisible, remained. Life had changed for everyone involved, especially James and Mark, whose lives had become intertwined in ways neither could have imagined. The incident served as a turning point, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their community. Conversations once avoided were now front and center, sparking reflection, growth, and, in some cases, transformation. James continued his daily routine, taking long walks with Max in the evenings. These walks had always been a source of peace for him, but now they carried deeper meaning. Each step felt like a quiet act of defiance, a way of reclaiming the streets that had witnessed both cruelty and courage. Neighbors greeted him warmly, many stopping to chat or thank him for inspiring them to think differently. Children waved enthusiastically at Max, who wagged his tail in response, happy to be adored. Yet, despite the growing sense of acceptance, James couldn't shake off the lingering tension whenever he passed certain houses, including Mark's. Mark, on the other hand, lived in a state of constant self-reproach. His days were filled with reminders of the harm he had caused, angry stares from neighbors, whispered comments at work, and sleepless nights haunted by guilt. Even after completing his court-mandated counseling and community service, he struggled to find redemption. Though he tried to rebuild his reputation, progress came slowly. Some people refused to forgive him entirely, while others remained skeptical of his intentions. Still, Mark pressed on, determined to prove that he was capable of change. One evening, during one of James's usual strolls, an unexpected encounter occurred. As he rounded the corner near the park, he noticed Mark sitting on a bench, staring blankly at the ground. It was unusual to see him outside, especially since he had largely kept to himself since the incident. Curiosity got the better of James, and he decided to approach cautiously. Max stayed close, his ears perked up as if sensing something significant was about to happen. "Mind if I sit?" James asked, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. Mark looked up, startled, then nodded hesitantly. "Go ahead," he said quietly, scooting over to make space. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and distant laughter of children playing nearby. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he admitted, his voice heavy with emotion, "about what I did and how much it hurt you and everyone else." James listened intently, his expression unreadable. He didn't interrupt, allowing Mark to continue. "I know saying sorry isn't enough," Mark went on, his words tumbling out in a rush. "But I want you to know I'm trying. Really trying. I've learned so much about myself and about people like you that I never understood before. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday you might see that I'm not the same person I was back then." His confession hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. James studied him carefully, searching for sincerity in his eyes. After a pause, he responded, "Change is hard, Mark. Trust me, I get that. But it's not just about what you say, it's about what you do. Actions speak louder than words." Mark nodded solemnly, absorbing the truth in James's statement. "I know," he said. "That's why I've been volunteering at the shelter and attending those workshops. I want to make things right. Not just for you, but for everyone I've let down." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they talked about their shared experiences living in the neighborhood. They discovered they had more in common than either would have guessed: frustrations with traffic, favorite local restaurants, and even a mutual love for classic rock music. By the time they parted ways, there was a tentative sense of understanding between them. Not quite friendship, but perhaps the beginning of something new. Word of this meeting spread quickly through the neighborhood, sparking mixed reactions. Some praised James for extending an olive branch, viewing it as a sign of strength and compassion. Others criticized him, arguing that Mark didn't deserve kindness after everything he had done. James heard these opinions but chose not to engage. He believed in giving people a chance to grow, even if it meant risking disappointment along the way. In the months that followed, small signs of progress emerged. Mark started attending neighborhood events, initially standing awkwardly on the sidelines before gradually joining conversations. He brought homemade cookies to potlucks and offered to help organize community cleanup drives. While not everyone welcomed him with open arms, his efforts began to chip away at the walls of distrust he had built. Meanwhile, James became a pillar of support within the community. He collaborated with local leaders to host discussions about race, privilege, and allyship, encouraging residents to challenge their assumptions and biases. His calm demeanor and willingness to listen earned him respect, even from those who initially doubted his intentions. Max remained his steadfast companion, accompanying him everywhere and serving as a reminder of loyalty and resilience. The bond between man and dog grew stronger with each passing day. Max seemed to sense when James needed comfort, resting his head on his lap during quiet moments or nudging him playfully when he sensed sadness. Together, they inspired others to cherish the connections in their own lives, whether with family, friends, or pets. As spring arrived, bringing warmer weather and blooming flowers, the neighborhood celebrated its annual block party. Residents gathered in the cul-de-sac, sharing food, music, and laughter under strings of twinkling lights. For the first time in years, the event felt truly inclusive, with people from all walks of life coming together in harmony. James stood near the grill, flipping burgers alongside Mr. Patel, a recent immigrant who had faced similar challenges adapting to the area. Nearby, children played tag, their giggles echoing through the air. Mark attended the party too, arriving late and lingering near the edge of the crowd. He watched nervously as James mingled with neighbors, laughing and chatting easily. Summoning his courage, he approached James once more. "Hey," he said softly, holding out a plate of brownies he had baked earlier that day. "Thought maybe you'd like these." James smiled, accepting the gesture graciously. "Thanks, Mark. That means a lot." They exchanged a few more words before parting ways again, but this time there was no awkwardness, just a shared acknowledgement of how far they had come. By the end of the night, the atmosphere buzzed with optimism. People danced, sang karaoke, and shared stories late into the evening. For a brief moment, differences faded into the background, replaced by a sense of unity and belonging. Even Mark found himself smiling, feeling, for the first time in a long while, that he belonged somewhere. As fireworks lit up the sky above Maple Street, James leaned against a tree, watching the colorful bursts reflect off Max's fur. He thought about everything that had happened, the pain, the lessons, the growth, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Despite the hardships, he had discovered beauty in resilience, strength in vulnerability, and hope in connection. And as the final sparkles faded into darkness, leaving behind a quiet hush, James knew one thing for certain: healing was possible. Not overnight and not without effort, but inch by inch, step by step, hearts could mend, bridges could be rebuilt, and communities could thrive. Under the glow of streetlights, surrounded by neighbors old and new, James and Max walked home together, ready to embrace whatever tomorrow might bring. Months turned into a year, and the neighborhood of Maple Street continued to evolve in ways no one could have predicted. The scars left by that fateful evening were still visible, but they had begun to fade, replaced by stories of growth, forgiveness, and renewed purpose. James and Mark, once symbols of division, now stood as reminders of humanity's capacity for change, a testament to the idea that even the deepest wounds can heal with time and effort. James's life settled into a rhythm of routine and reflection. His walks with Max became less about reclaiming space and more about appreciating the beauty of his surroundings. The streets he had once navigated cautiously now felt like home, filled with familiar faces and friendly greetings. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now invited him to barbecues, book clubs, and weekend brunches. Children ran up to pet Max, laughing as the dog playfully nudged them with his nose. These small moments of connection reminded James why he had chosen this quiet suburban town in the first place: to build a life rooted in community and belonging. Max, ever loyal and protective, remained a constant source of joy and comfort. The German Shepherd had become something of a local celebrity, earning treats and affection from nearly everyone he encountered. People often stopped James to share stories of how Max's bravery during the altercation had inspired them to appreciate their own pets more deeply. Some even credited Max with sparking conversations about loyalty, trust, and unconditional love, qualities that transcended species and spoke to the core of human relationships. For Mark, life was still a work in progress, but he embraced each day with a determination that surprised even himself. Counseling sessions had taught him to confront the roots of his anger and prejudice, forcing him to examine painful memories and ingrained biases. He learned to recognize triggers that fueled his temper and practiced healthier ways to cope with frustration. Volunteering at the shelter gave him a sense of purpose, allowing him to connect with people from diverse backgrounds and experiences. Slowly but surely, he began to see the world and himself through new eyes. The turning point came one crisp autumn afternoon when Mark decided to organize a community event aimed at fostering inclusivity and understanding. Inspired by James's advocacy efforts, he proposed hosting a Unity Day celebration, complete with games, food trucks, and workshops on topics like empathy, allyship, and cultural appreciation. To his surprise, the idea received overwhelming support from neighbors, eager to continue the momentum of positive change. Planning the event brought people together in unexpected ways. James played an active role, offering suggestions and helping coordinate logistics. Mrs. Thompson baked dozens of cookies, while Mr. Patel provided colorful decorations. Even teenagers like Sarah and Tommy pitched in, designing flyers and spreading the word on social media. For the first time in years, the entire neighborhood worked toward a common goal, united by a shared vision of harmony and acceptance. On the day of the event, Maple Street buzzed with excitement. Residents transformed the cul-de-sac into a vibrant festival ground, stringing fairy lights between trees and setting up booths showcasing local talent. Children darted around clutching balloons and face paint designs shaped like hearts and stars. Music played softly in the background, blending harmoniously with laughter and chatter. At the center of it all stood a large banner reading, "Together we grow." Mark addressed the crowd during the opening ceremony, his voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in his chest. "A year ago I made a mistake. A big one," he began, pausing to gather his thoughts. "I let fear and ignorance guide my actions, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. But thanks to James's grace and the support of this community, I've been given a chance to learn and grow. Today isn't just about celebrating unity, it's about committing to be better for ourselves, for our neighbors, and for future generations. Applause erupted, echoing through the street. James stepped forward next, his presence commanding yet warm. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said, his gaze sweeping over the sea of smiling faces. "It takes courage, patience, and a willingness to listen. What we've built here today is proof that when we come together, anything is possible. Let's keep this spirit alive, not just today, but every day." As the festivities unfolded, connections deepened. Strangers exchanged stories over plates of homemade dishes, discovering shared interests and dreams. Workshops encouraged participants to step outside their comfort zones, challenging assumptions and fostering empathy. Kids played tug-of-war and sack races, their giggles filling the air. Even Max joined in the fun, happily bounding after frisbees tossed by enthusiastic children. By sunset, the atmosphere grew quieter, tinged with a sense of accomplishment and gratitude. Lanterns illuminated the street, casting soft glows on smiling faces. James stood near the edge of the gathering, watching as Max lounged contentedly beside him. Nearby, Mark chatted animatedly with a group of neighbors, his laughter genuine and unguarded. It was a scene James never thought he'd witness, a community bound not by fear or resentment, but by hope and mutual respect. Later that night, as the last guest departed and the cleanup began, James found himself alone with Mark for a brief moment. "You did good today," James said simply, his tone sincere. Mark smiled, though his eyes glistened with emotion. "Thanks to you," he replied. "If it weren't for your example, I don't know if I'd have had the strength to try." They parted ways shortly after, each returning to their respective homes. As James settled onto his porch, Max curled up at his feet. He reflected on the journey they had taken together, the challenges faced, the lessons learned, and the bridges rebuilt. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly hold obstacles, James felt confident in the resilience of the human spirit. After all, healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it and moving forward with intention. Under the glow of streetlights, Maple Street shimmered with promise. The neighborhood had weathered storms, confronted truths, and emerged stronger than before. And as James leaned back, listening to the distant hum of crickets and feeling the warmth of Max's body against his leg, he knew one thing for certain. True strength lay not in perfection, but in the courage to embrace imperfection, and in the belief that tomorrow could always be better than today.